The night split open as thunder rolled over the shattered coronation hall, and the air tasted of iron and smoke. Elara Wynford staggered through falling ash while tapestries burned like dying constellations. Lord Malrec lifted a ringed hand, and the marble floor groaned as if grieving. Ronan Blackthorn seized her wrist and pulled her from a collapsing arch. Elara said, "Did you do this?" and her voice trembled like a blade against glass. Ronan said, "Breathe and move," his tone flat, his eyes stormlit with worry he tried to hide. A shockwave rippled past, carrying whispers that sounded like her name. Sir Caelan Hart appeared in the flashing gloom, his gaze a wound half-healed. Malrec said, "Return what was stolen," and the torches guttered to blue. The crown circlet slid from Elara's hair and rang once against a cracked step. She tasted fear, and beneath it, a fierce spark that would not bow. Dawn bled pale over the cedars as Elara reached the forest verge with lungs burning and thoughts louder than crows. Ronan kept a careful distance, a shadow that refused to vanish. Elara said, "You dragged me from death, yet I do not trust you." And the words shook. Ronan said, "Then trust your feet and keep them moving," and he scanned the trees. Somewhere behind, stones fell like final verdicts. A brook whispered of older vows, and her braid stuck cold against her throat. She wanted to grieve the shattered hall, but grief demanded stillness she could not afford. A raven wheeled overhead and cried like a torn veil. Elara said, "Malrec wants something I do not understand," and the forest seemed to listen. The path curled into mist, and a strange warmth bloomed in her palm like a secret waking. By the river bend, they paused where light scattered across ripples like small blessings. Ronan knelt to wash soot from his hands, and the water darkened and cleared. Elara said, "Why risk yourself?" and the question felt heavier than armor. Ronan said, "Because you matter to people you have not met," and he would not meet her gaze. A fisherman's bell tolled once in the distance, then silence spun tight again. She studied his profile and found edges honed by long roads. The river carried ash downstream, and her chest ached at the sight. A wind rose, scented with thyme and rain left behind. Elara said, "I was told I died," and the words landed like stones. The current answered with a hush as if keeping counsel. The path narrowed beside ancient standing stones veined with lichen and faint rune scars. A chill touched Elara's wrist where warmth had bloomed before. Ronan said, "Do not touch the marks," and his tone was kinder than his words. She reached anyway, and the stone thrummed like a hidden drum. The air smelled of ozone and crushed mint, and a low hum braided with her pulse. A raven landed atop a stone and tilted its head like a judge. Elara said, "Someone watches," and her mouth went dry. The hum built until it almost formed a name. Ronan stepped closer without thinking, and the space between them tightened. The sound collapsed into silence, leaving only wind tugging the leaves. They found shelter in a ruined chapel laced with ivy and broken light through a rose window. A small fire cracked, and the smoke rose like thin prayers. Lady Ysabel Moraine stepped from shadow with a staff carved in spirals. Elara said, "You were gone," and relief cut her sharper than fear. Ysabel said, "Names survive when crowns do not," and her eyes held old storms. Ronan nodded to the older woman with careful respect. The chapel smelled of dust and thyme, and doves muttered in the rafters. Ysabel said, "Malrec hunts a key you carry in your blood," and the fire popped as if agreeing. Elara pressed a palm to her chest and felt that heat again. Outside, the forest held its breath and waited. The forest thickened into shadows as dusk pressed against the branches, and Elara Wynford felt the weight of unseen eyes. Ronan Blackthorn walked ahead, his hand hovering near the dagger at his belt. Elara said, "We are hunted," and the words left her lips like frost. Ronan said, "Not hunted," followed his voice low as he scanned the thickets. Behind them, Lady Ysabel Moraine traced her staff across roots, whispering old words that flickered faintly. The ground trembled, as if something beneath stirred. Elara said, "Malrec will not stop until the throne is ash," and fear sharpened her breath. Ysabel said, "Fear is power when used wisely," her tone steady as a mountain. The distant sound of hooves cracked the silence, and every crow took flight. Ronan's jaw set, and Elara's hand brushed the place on her chest where warmth still lingered. The path ahead darkened into a tunnel of trees, promising peril. The party emerged into a clearing bathed in moonlight, where shattered stones marked a ruin half buried in moss. Elara felt a pulse of memory, though she had never stood here before. She said, "This place remembers me," and her voice carried wonder and dread. Ronan said, "Old places remember all who bleed for them," and his gaze swept the shadows. Ysabel placed her hand on the stone, and faint symbols glowed like veins of fire. The air crackled, and a raven shrieked, scattering sparks of fear. Elara said, "Malrec seeks this place," and she stepped closer. Ysabel said, "Then he will be met with more than he expects," her voice sharp with warning. Ronan's eyes narrowed, and he drew steel with a soft hiss. The clearing grew colder as a breeze cut through, smelling of iron and rain. From the shadows stepped armored riders bearing Malrec's sigil, their faces hidden beneath steel visors. Elara's heart pounded, her breath shallow. Ronan said, "Stay behind me," and steel sang as his blade lifted. Ysabel raised her staff, and light burst forth in a shield that hummed like bees. Elara said, "I cannot run forever," her voice breaking against fear. One rider said, "The crown is bound to your blood, princess," the word heavy with threat. Her knees wavered, but resolve hardened in her chest. Ronan lunged, steel clashing with the first strike, sparks flying like stars. Ysabel's ward flickered as arrows hissed through the clearing. Elara lifted her hands without thought, and heat pulsed outward in a wave that knocked riders from their saddles. Silence followed, stunned and broken only by the crackle of firelight from the runes. Smoke curled where the battle had burned the grass, and Elara's chest heaved with effort she did not understand. She whispered, "That power was mine," though terror weighed each syllable. Ronan said, "You saved us," his gaze fierce but shadowed with unease. Ysabel steadied her, hand firm on her shoulder. She said, "The curse stirs now, awakened by your blood," her words grim as stone. Elara shook, feeling the warmth in her chest grow hotter. Ronan sheathed his blade, but his eyes did not leave her face. He said, "If Malrec knows this, he will come with armies," and silence pressed hard around them. A raven circled overhead and cried as if mocking fate. Elara said, "Then I must learn to control what I carry," her tone a blade drawn from fire. The group retreated to the shelter of a crumbled watchtower overlooking the valley. Wind howled through broken stones, carrying the smell of distant smoke. Elara stared toward the horizon, where Malrec's banners now glimmered faintly in the dark. She said, "The war has begun," her words a vow of steel. Ronan said, "Then we prepare for the storm," his voice low, steady, a promise of defiance. Ysabel traced a sigil on the wall, sealing them in a ward of silence. The fire burned small but fierce, and shadows played across their faces. Elara touched her chest where the heat now thrummed like a living heart. She whispered, "This power may destroy me," and the night seemed to hold its breath. Ronan met her gaze and said, "Or it may save us all." The night stretched heavy with silence as Elara Wynford stood by the watchtower's crumbled window, moonlight painting her face pale. Ronan Blackthorn leaned against the wall, his arms folded though his eyes betrayed unrest. Elara said, "You do not sleep," her tone softer than she intended. Ronan said, "Sleep is for those without enemies," his words sharp but laced with unspoken care. The wind tugged at her braid as if reminding her she was still alive. She whispered, "When you look at me, I feel like you see what I cannot yet bear." His gaze flickered away, though the truth lay in his silence. Shadows deepened, and for a fleeting moment, the distance between them narrowed like a breath about to touch. At dawn, mist blanketed the valley, and Elara's heart tightened as a lone rider approached. Sir Caelan Hart dismounted, his golden hair damp with dew, his scar catching the light. Elara said, "I thought you lost," and her voice trembled with memory. Caelan said, "I was lost, but not beyond return," his tone torn between sorrow and hope. Ronan's jaw clenched, his silence louder than words. Ysabel studied Caelan with eyes that carried suspicion. Elara's chest ached, torn between the boy she once trusted and the man who had walked darker paths. The raven croaked in the branches, mocking the fragile reunion. The river roared as they crossed a weathered bridge, and power rippled beneath the stones. Ysabel said, "This place is old with blood and magic," her voice grave. Elara touched the railing, and heat pulsed through her palm. She gasped. "It answers me," her eyes wide with fear and awe. Caelan stepped close, his hand brushing hers by accident, his gaze heavy with unspoken words. Ronan watched, his gray eyes storm dark, his knuckles tight on the hilt of his blade. The bridge trembled as if remembering the wars it had borne. A whisper like her name wove into the wind, and Elara shivered, torn between the safety of touch and the danger of what stirred within. A traveler joined them at dusk, cloaked and shifting like smoke. The figure bowed low, their voice smooth. "I go by Kieran," they said, eyes gleaming with secrets. Elara studied them, suspicion pricking her heart. Ronan's hand lingered near his dagger. Ysabel whispered, "Shapeshifters walk where trust cannot," her tone a warning. Caelan frowned, his hand brushing the pommel of his sword. Kieran smiled, neither warm nor cold, but unreadable. Elara said, "Why should we believe you?" her voice steady, though her pulse thundered. Kieran replied, "Because the enemy you face is also mine," and the words twisted like shadows through the air. That night, Elara dreamed of fire. She stood in the ruined hall again, crown burning in her palm. Malrec's voice whispered, "Blood will choose," and shadows coiled tighter. She screamed, but only sparks escaped. Ronan appeared, his face strained with fear, but the dream twisted, and Caelan stood where Ronan had been, reaching for her with scarred hands. Kieran's laughter echoed, changing faces like masks in flame. Elara woke, gasping, the fire beside her nearly out. Ysabel stirred and said, "Dreams carry truth when magic is near," her eyes heavy with knowing. Elara pressed her chest, the warmth now unbearable, and whispered, "I cannot escape what waits in me." The journey brought them to the jagged cliffs of Blackfen, where storm clouds churned like beasts above. Elara Wynford felt the sea wind claw at her braid, as fear tangled with resolve. Ronan Blackthorn said, "This is Malrec's ground," his voice tight, hand on sword. Caelan Hart stood apart, gaze lost on the waves, his scar stark under gray light. Ysabel Moraine traced runes into the stone with her staff, warding against what stirred. Elara whispered, "He hunts me still," her words trembling but edged with defiance. Kieran leaned against a rock, lips curling in a knowing smirk. The sea roared, and from the mist rose riders cloaked in shadow, Malrec's laughter echoing through the gale. In the ruined outpost by the cliffs, Ronan's secret broke open like glass. Malrec's soldiers called him Oathbreaker, and Elara's heart stilled. She said, "What did you hide from me?" her voice sharp as the sea's edge. Ronan said once, "I swore loyalty to Malrec," his gray eyes shadowed with shame. Caelan spat, "Then you are no better than him," his words a blade meant to cut. Ysabel struck her staff against stone, silence heavy. Ronan's jaw hardened. "I turned against him when I saw what he would do," he said, steady but raw. Elara's chest ached, torn between fury and fragile trust. Outside, the storm cracked louder, as though the sky judged them. Night fell thick over the outpost, and betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Elara sat alone by the fire, her braid undone, fingers trembling. Caelan approached, his voice low, "He cannot be trusted." She whispered, "Yet he saved me," her words fragile. Caelan's scarred face softened, but guilt haunted his eyes. Ysabel's voice drifted from the shadows. "Trust is a coin easily spent, seldom returned." Ronan stood outside in the rain, refusing warmth, his shoulders burdened by memory. Elara's heart pulled in two directions, one toward the man who once broke oaths, and the other toward the knight who carried old wounds. The fire cracked, throwing sparks like warnings. The storm eased by dawn, and Elara found Caelan staring into the gray horizon, his armor dull with rust. He said, "Once I swore to protect you, yet I failed." Elara's breath caught, pain flickering. "You left when I needed you," she said, voice breaking. Caelan's hand trembled on his sword, shame etched deep. Ronan's silhouette appeared, tense, a silent wall between past and present. Ysabel murmured, "The fallen are not beyond redemption," though doubt laced her tone. The sea wind carried Malrec's banners into view, black against pale skies. Elara's heart thudded, her past and present warred before her eyes. At sunset, Ysabel revealed the truth hidden too long. "The curse runs in your blood, Elara," she said, her voice steady but sorrowed. Elara's chest tightened, the warmth inside now burning like fire. She whispered, "It will kill me." Ronan stepped forward, eyes fierce. "Or make you stronger than him," he said, defiance hard as steel. Caelan's face paled, his voice rough. "She will be consumed." Kieran laughed softly from the shadows. "Or she will be exactly what fate intended." Elara's gaze burned with both fear and resolve. She said, "Then I will not run. If it is curse or gift, it is mine." The sea swallowed the sun, and the first stars lit a sky heavy with destiny. The valley thundered with the clash of steel as Malrec's banners darkened the horizon. Elara Wynford stood on the ridge, her cloak snapping like a banner of defiance. Ronan Blackthorn said, "We cannot hold them all," his voice hard with reality. Caelan Hart drew his sword, his scar glinting like old betrayal. "Then we fall with honor," he declared, though fear tightened his jaw. Ysabel Moraine struck her staff to the earth, runes burning through the grass, weaving wards. Kieran shifted like smoke, eyes gleaming with secrets. Elara raised her hand, and warmth burst into fire that painted the ridge in gold. She said, "We do not fall tonight," her voice steady as steel. The battle raged, screams and steel filling the air. Elara hurled fire that split Malrec's riders, but each strike drained her chest of breath. Ronan fought at her side, his blade moving with ruthless grace. Caelan clashed against armored foes, his eyes never straying far from her. Ysabel whispered incantations that stitched barriers of light between falling comrades. Kieran darted like a phantom, striking unseen. Elara gasped, "This power eats at me," her voice cracking under the weight. Ronan shouted, "Then let me carry you," his tone fierce, his arms steady at her back. The ground shook as Malrec's army pressed closer. Amid chaos, Ysabel pulled Elara aside, her eyes grave. "Each time you call the fire, the curse claims more," she said, voice quaking with truth. Elara whispered, "What if I let it take me?" her gaze lost in flame. Ysabel shook her head, silver braid whipping. "Then Malrec wins, and your bloodline burns with you." Ronan dragged a wounded soldier to safety, hearing but not speaking. Caelan growled, "We cannot ask her to fight fate alone," his blade dripping with blood. Elara clenched her fists, sparks crackling between her fingers. She said, "If I must break, then let it be for them." The fire roared higher, hungering for her soul. As lightning tore the sky, Kieran's mask slipped. His features shifted, becoming a soldier Elara once trusted, then fading into another stranger's guise. Ronan snarled, "You play both sides," his voice edged with fury. Kieran smirked, "I play only for survival." Elara's heart raced, betrayal burning deeper than wounds. Caelan lunged, sword raised, but Kieran vanished into smoke, reappearing behind him. Ysabel cried, "He is bound to prophecy, not loyalty." Elara shouted, "Then he will show his true face when the choice comes," her voice breaking through the storm. Trust fractured like glass, leaving silence sharper than steel. The clash peaked as Malrec himself strode onto the ridge, obsidian armor gleaming, his ring pulsing black fire. Elara froze, her blood answering the cursed power. Malrec said, "Your throne or your life," his voice cold as winter. Ronan stepped in front of her, sword raised. "She will give you neither," he spat. Caelan flanked, his eyes burning with rage. Ysabel's staff blazed with desperate wards, sparks hissing. Kieran lingered in shadow, unreadable. Elara's chest burned, heat roaring until it nearly consumed her. She whispered, "If destiny calls for sacrifice, it will be mine to give." Storm split above them, sky and earth trembling for the battle to come. The ridge shook as thunder rolled, and Elara Wynford felt the curse flare like a furnace beneath her ribs, while storm light split the clouds. Ronan Blackthorn said, "I stand with you," and his sword rose as if swearing an oath older than stone. Sir Caelan Hart circled to the flank, his scar bright as a warning carved by fate. Lady Ysabel Moraine tapped her staff and said, "Hold the line," and runes crawled like fireflies across wet rock. Kieran drifted near the shadows and said, "Choose quickly, Princess," and his smile cut like a secret. Lord Malrec Drager advanced with calm disdain and said, "Kneel and breathe another hour." Elara tasted rain and fear and answered, "I kneel to no thief of blood." Power gathered around her palms, hungry and radiant, and the knight leaned in to listen. Malrec lifted his ring and the air buckled, dragging sparks from Elara's breath, as if the knight wished to drink her whole. Ronan said, "Break his focus," and he lunged, steel ringing like thunder set to a blade. Caelan crashed into a shield wall with a roar and said, "For the rightful crown," though doubt shadowed his eyes. Ysabel swept a warding arc, and blue sigils pulsed against a wave of black wind. Kieran slipped behind enemy lines and said, "Let chaos pick a side," and his knives flashed like brief stars. Malrec said, "Your fire is a leash," and shadow tethered Elara's wrists mid-strike. She spat rain and answered, "Then watch me break it," and the crack in her voice burned into iron. The ridge flared gold as her heart chose fury over fear. The tether snapped back and hurled Elara to the brink, the abyss gasping below as stones tore free into night. Ronan caught her with one arm and said, "Choose me or the fire," and his eyes begged for breath and tomorrow. Caelan planted his blade into rock and said, "Choose the kingdom," and storm glare crowned him with tragic light. Ysabel shouted, "Balance heart and flame," and her voice cracked like old timber under weight. Kieran whispered, "Choose yourself," and vanished into rain that smelled of iron and memory. Malrec said, "Choose surrender," and the storm bowed to his arrogance. Elara closed her eyes and saw a throne built from names that loved her. She said, "I choose duty and love together," and the heat gathered without devouring her bones. Caelan stepped between Malrec and Elara and said, "My oath holds now," and he took the blow meant to unmake a bloodline. The ring spat night through his breastplate, and he sagged with a sound like breaking bells. Ronan roared and drove Malrec back 3 paces, hatred cutting clean in as winter. Ysabel pressed a palm to Caelan's chest and said, "Breathe, night," while runes flickered like spent stars. Kieran reappeared and said, "Debt paid," and slipped a blade into a seam of obsidian at Malrec's hip. Malrec snarled, "Traitor," and the storm recoiled from his fury. Elara knelt by Caelan and said, "Do not leave me again," and tears salted the fire in her mouth. Caelan managed, "Be the queen we lost," and the world narrowed to the choice she had already made. Elara rose with slow certainty and said, "Your shadow ends with me," and the curse bent like heated steel between will and flame. Ronan moved to guard her flank and said, "I am your wall," and fear lost its voice in his throat. Ysabel traced a final sigil and said, "Take what is yours," while rain softened to a hush that felt like mercy. Kieran laughed once and said, "History loves audacity," and stepped aside as if yielding a stage. Malrec lifted his ring and screamed, "Kneel," but the word broke against the light pouring from Elara's hands. She crossed her palms, drew the fire inward and said, "I name myself Wynford," and the ridge answered with thunder that belonged to her blood. The ring cracked like ice, and night spilled harmless into rain. Dawn spilled gold across the ridge, steam rising where rain met broken stone. Elara Wynford stood still, the fire within her chest quiet at last, though her hands trembled. Ronan Blackthorn said, "It is over," yet his eyes lingered on her as though fearing she might break apart. Lady Ysabel Moraine leaned heavy on her staff, lines of fatigue etched deep. "Victory always asks for more than it gives," she said, voice weary. Caelan's heart lay pale upon the ground, breath shallow, the scar on his cheek fading against pallor. Elara knelt and whispered, "You kept your oath at the end," her words soft as prayer. A raven circled once overhead, before vanishing into the light. They gathered beneath the shattered banners as silence claimed the valley. Elara said, "The throne is not mine alone. It is a burden I must share," her voice firm despite the tremor. Ronan stepped close, the weight of his loyalty plain. Ysabel bowed her head and said, "Then you will not rule as your father did, but as yourself." Caelan stirred weakly, whispering, "Do not let love and duty divide you." Kieran appeared from shadow, expression unreadable. He said, "The war ends, yet the game begins anew." Elara's heart tightened, but her voice did not falter. "I will face what comes," she said, the dawn catching fire in her eyes. In the quiet ruins of the watchtower, Elara sat with Ronan, the firelight dancing across his guarded face. She said, "Every path led me to you," her words raw as wounds. He turned away, gray eyes clouded. "Loving me will cost you more than crowns," he said, voice low with fear. She reached for his hand, warm against scarred steel. "Then let it cost," she whispered, a vow carved in flame. Ysabel watched from the shadows, her lips pressed in both sorrow and pride. Caelan slept nearby, his breath shallow but steady. Outside, the stars wheeled like patient witnesses to promises neither curse nor crown could break. The company gathered once more, smaller now, but bound by what they had survived. Ysabel said, "The world will test you again, but you are no longer a child of fear." Elara nodded, braid glinting in sunlight. Ronan said, "Your enemies will rise in silence first," his tone edged with caution. Caelan spoke faintly, "Yet silence can also be peace if we choose it." Kieran leaned against the wall, smirking. "Peace is only the pause before the next storm," he said, though something softer hid behind his words. Elara's voice carried over them, steady. "Then let the storm find me ready," she declared. That evening, Elara walked alone to the ridge where the storm had broken, the wind carrying scents of rain and ash. She lifted her face to the stars, her crownless head unbowed. "I am both curse and queen," she whispered, words stolen by night. Ronan's shadow lingered at a distance, silent but steady. A raven crossed the sky, wings black against starlight, and she felt no fear. Elara closed her eyes, and the warmth in her chest no longer burned, it sang. The world would not forget her return, nor the fire that would guide it. With a final breath she said, "The lost princess is lost no more."